I remember that stormy night when I arrived at my boyfriend Eddie's apartment. He welcomed me with a warm hug and helped me take off my jacket before taking me to the living room, where two other friends were waiting for us, Valerie and Rob, who greeted me warmly, and I returned the gesture. I was expecting some of Eddie's other friends to arrive, but he explained that the rain had prevented them from coming to the meeting, so it was just the four of us. Eddie and I had been going out for about 3 weeks, and although he was quite popular because of his involvement in sports, I tried not to let that influence me too much. I also knew that he could be quite forceful at times, but he hadn't shown me that side of him in our relationship, so I thought everything was going well between us. We settled down on the sofa, and Eddie asked me how my day had been. I told him I'd been at home doing nothing, and as I did so, I took a quick look at where Valerie and Rob were, and noticed that they were distracted on their phones. I frowned a little because I realized that maybe they felt left out, so I whispered to Eddie that we should include them in the conversation. He smiled mischievously and then suggested that we play a game, Truth or Dare. I rolled my eyes because it wasn't exactly my idea of fun, but both friends seemed ready to participate, so in the end, I agreed. First, we established some rules. No lies, and if someone couldn't do the challenge or answer the question, they'd have to take a drink. Once that was clear, Eddie looked at everyone and asked if we were ready. We all nodded, and to be honest, I was amused by the idea of what might happen. Then we sat in a circle and began. Eddie was the first and challenged Valeria to drink water while upside down, which caused a cascade of laughter when she ended up completely soaked. Then Rob challenged Eddie to make a fool of himself in his underwear, and without thinking twice, Eddie took a shot of vodka and ran off to do his challenge. After several rounds in which I chose the truth option every time, I decided to take a risk and chose a dare. But I was very surprised when Valerie dared me to kiss Rob. I was shocked for a few seconds, but I saw that Eddie showed no reaction, so I assumed he didn't mind. So I went over to Rob and gave him a short kiss on the lips. After completing my challenge, I returned to my seat feeling a kind of pride and a little adrenaline in my body. But at that moment I turned to look at Eddie. "What the hell have you done?" Eddie said to me with an angry expression on his face. Suddenly the atmosphere became tense, and I knew that things were not right. "It's just a game, Ed," I said, a little surprised by his reaction, but that's when it got scary. At that moment, I saw the look of fury on Eddie's face, but before I could say anything to him, he slapped me so hard that I fell to the floor. Then he grabbed me by the hair and started dragging me along while shouting horrible things at me. Valeria stared at me with eyes as wide as saucers, while I screamed and Rob tried to control the situation. "Leave her alone, Eddie. What the hell are you doing?" he said, coming closer. But he didn't listen, and with a quick movement he dragged me into his room, and I knew right away that I couldn't let that happen. I tried to free myself with all my might, begging him to let me go and shouting at him that it was all just a game. But he was completely beside himself and my voice was simply lost in the chaos. That was the most humiliating and at the same time terrifying moment I had ever experienced. But things were about to get even worse. Seeing that Eddie would not listen to reason, Rob decided to try to control him by force, so he gave him a strong push and then a punch. This made him let go of me, and as soon as I felt that he was free, I began to run towards the door desperately, feeling dazed, angry, and terrified at the same time. The situation had become completely disastrous, and I never imagined that Eddie had such a violent and abusive side. As I tried to leave the house, I heard the racket of banging and shouting behind me, so I turned for a second and saw Valeria crouching down next to Rob, asking if he was all right. He could hardly get up, his lip was broken and he was looking confused, but I didn't see Eddie with them. "We have to go. I've never seen Eddie go this crazy," I heard Rob say. But at that very moment, the kitchen door opened and Eddie came out brandishing a huge knife. I felt the world stop. I ran out the door as fast as my legs could carry me, trying to save my life. Outside, the rain was still pouring down, and as I crossed the lawn towards the pavement, my shoes slipped from my feet, and I almost fell face first to the ground. But I didn't stop. My breathing was erratic, and my heart felt like it was about to burst. At that moment, I looked back again and felt that Eddie was only a few meters away from me, knife in hand. As I ran like crazy down the street, the distance between us was closing, and that scared the hell out of me. I knew that if he managed to catch me, I was dead, so I ran as if my life depended on it, because it really did. I began to think that I really should never have been with him. That guy was a complete psychopath, and now I was about to be at his mercy, who was now so close that I could hear his footsteps echoing and the sound of his heavy breathing above the heavy rain. Seeing that Eddie was right behind me, I tried to run faster, but then I felt a strong blow from behind, and we both fell to the ground. In an instant, he was on top of me, pinning me down with his body. I hit, I kicked, I even tried to bite him, but it was in vain. He had me, and when I saw him raise the knife, I did the only thing left to do. I started to beg for my life. Then Eddie slowly lowered the knife and put it to my throat. "Why did you do it?" "Do you like Rob?" he said, his teeth clenched. I could feel the cold of the metal pressing against my neck, and I repeated that it had only been a game, and that I didn't feel anything for Rob. "Liar," he shouted at me as he raised the knife again. In that instant, I closed my eyes, waiting for the imminent pain of the stab, but instead I felt his weight fall away from me, and when I opened my eyes, he was sitting next to me, soaked by the rain and with the knife on the ground. I couldn't believe it. He was looking at me with his face full of anguish, as if he had somehow realized what he was about to do. I didn't know if it was out of remorse or because he was a bipolar madman. All I cared about was that this was an opportunity to escape, so I jumped to my feet and ran to the nearest avenue. I finally took the first taxi I saw, and when I got home, I didn't tell anyone what had happened. Part of me wondered if I was a coward for not telling anyone. In fact, I never reported it, nor did I say anything about what happened. I just left it behind and tried to forget that episode. I wondered if I was being too cowardly, but I really didn't want to relive it in any way, just forget it as if it had never happened. Eddie and I studied at the same university, so I saw him from time to time, but when I ran into him on campus, I just looked away and he did the same. There was a kind of unspoken agreement between us not to talk to each other. I grew up in a quiet, friendly neighborhood, the kind you see in the movies, with white picket fences, dogs in every yard, and moms taking their kids to soccer practice. It was a perfect place, where everyone seemed to know each other. My mom was at home most of the time, taking care of me and my little sister Anna, who was a year younger. Like any other girl in the neighborhood, we were both involved in activities. I focused on sports, and Anna was an avid reader, so she was part of a book club. Our living room was full of my trophies and diplomas, while Anna had her own corner for her spelling awards. From the outside, we looked like an ideal family. The meals my mom made were the best she could have, and those floral arrangements she made for dinner, even when it wasn't a special day, gave a warm and beautiful touch to the home. But there was something I never mentioned. My dad was a complete mystery. We never knew exactly what he did for a living. We often saw him in a suit, leaving early in the morning before the sun came up, and he would return just in time for dinner. He was always talking on the phone in another room, and his office on the second floor was totally off limits to us. This story takes place just as we were planning to go on vacation, something I remember very clearly as I woke up around 5 in the morning full of excitement, unable to sleep. We had a flight at 9 that would take us to the Maldives, so I was tossing and turning in bed full of anxiety. When the sun began to rise, I decided it was time to get up, thinking that the rest of the family was still asleep, but I was very wrong. As I went downstairs, I could hear Dad talking quietly from the kitchen. I silently approached and listened to fragments of their conversation. "I told you I don't have time for this. I hired the guy to take care of it," he said in an annoyed tone. "I've got a flight in a couple of hours. Don't make me go down there and do his job. You know how that's going to end." I had no idea what he was talking about, but the seriousness of his voice made me uneasy. "Yeah, sure. Make sure the sweets are there and all that. I'll be right there," he concluded, and ended the call. The word sweets caught my attention. I licked my lips, intrigued. But just then I saw Dad put on his jacket. Knowing he was heading for the car, I decided to follow him, so I quickly slipped away to the kitchen and then to the garage. From there, I heard his footsteps getting closer, so on impulse, I got into the back of his SUV and hid under the seat. I wanted to surprise him and see where he was going. The excitement was bubbling inside me. What adventure awaited us, I wondered excitedly. So after hiding in the car, I realized that he was going to a place called Destination Candy. I was jumping with excitement, thinking about all the sweets I was going to get. But there was also a little competition going on in my head. I didn't want my sister to get more sweets than me, so I decided to follow Dad, laughing to myself. "He'll never know I'm here," I thought to myself. However, not even 5 minutes had passed when I heard a sudden screech of brakes. "What on earth was that?" asked Dad, looking for something on the seat next to him. At that moment, I didn't understand what it was, but now that I'm older, I'm pretty sure it was a gun. I stayed put, so I peeked out from under the seat, and that's when my dad saw me and almost jumped when he realized I was there. "I know you're going for candy, and I wanted to help you," I said with a nervous smile. "What candy?" he replied, clearly confused and a little scared. "Yes, I heard you talking on the phone," I explained. Then he relaxed a little. "Okay, yes, sweets, let's go to the store, but promise me you'll stay in the car," he asked. I assured him that I would, and soon we were on our way. When we arrived at our destination, Dad made me promise again that I wouldn't move from the car. But the minutes passed, and my excitement turned to anxiety when I saw that he wasn't coming back. I waited for about 10 or 20 minutes, but he didn't come out, and the idea of sweets was starting to obsess me, so I decided to go in and hurry my dad up. I opened the door to the shop carefully, expecting to find a shop full of sweets with employees dressed in colorful clothes and all that. But what I saw is something that to this day gives me chills just thinking about it. Dad was sitting tied to a chair, surrounded by two guys who looked dangerous. One had a gun and the other a baseball bat. His face was covered in bruises and blood, and the men were shouting at him if he thought he was a big shot, and every time he tried to defend himself, they hurt him more. I hid behind a box, tears streaming down my face as I watched the scene. "You're going to die, you know," said one of them in a threatening tone. "Give me the codes and don't make your family suffer." Dad, terrified, kept shouting to be left out of this. "I'll give you the codes," he finally agreed, and he started to give them the information they needed. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" the man said to him just before pointing the gun at his head, and my eyes widened, unable to process what was happening. Suddenly, I heard a deafening shot so loud that I thought my ears would explode. I covered my ears with my hands and closed my eyes, trying to block it all out, but when I opened my eyes again, what I saw is something that haunted me for years, and to this day, I relive it from time to time in my nightmares. The men were laughing mockingly at my father's lifeless, bloodied body. His face was covered in blood, his blue eyes were open, staring into space, and there was a small hole between his eyebrows from which a lot of blood was coming out. My dad was dead. I stood there paralyzed, waiting for the horror to fade, but it didn't. Once the men had left, I finally dared to approach, and I began to cry, embracing his body. His eyes were open, but he was no longer with me. After a while, I left the place with my hands and clothes stained with blood, and what happened next was a blur to me. To this day, I don't remember how I got home. Everything that happened that day after my dad died has been completely erased from my memory. The next thing I remember is standing in front of his coffin at his funeral. Shortly afterwards, we moved away to the other side of the country, trying to rebuild our lives. But even today, the fear and sadness of seeing my father dead in front of me never fade. The image continues to haunt me, like a constant echo in my mind. Perhaps that is why my mother has never wanted to tell me what happened in those 24 or 48 hours that my mind was switched off, even until today. The only thing I knew for sure was that my father was involved in something shady and he was keeping very bad company. Hi, I'm Harry Wellington, and today I want to tell you about something that left a big mark on me when I was only 14 years old. In my neighborhood, there was a boy my age called Mathieu, and his parents, Grace and Richard, were a bit strange. They didn't talk to anyone else in the neighborhood except us, which always seemed a bit odd to us, but we never gave it much importance. My mom's name is Noah, and my dad's is Carter. They have always been super affectionate with me, and we were a pretty close and happy family. I remember one day I was playing with my toys when suddenly I heard shouting coming from Matthew's house. His parents' voices were clear, and you could tell they were arguing. "You can't give me anything my whole life," his mom was shouting. It was the kind of fight that often resonated in the neighborhood. "I'm going to leave you if you don't change," said Richard, while she pleaded, "Please don't say that. What are you talking about?" They were that weird. Because our houses were so close, they would sometimes come to pick us up. One day they were getting ready to go on vacation for a month, and my dad asked them where Matthew was. "He's in the car," Grace replied a little hastily. "Please take good care of each other," I added, feeling that they weren't being completely honest, so I decided to go over to the car to see Mathieu, whose silhouette could be made out through the window. But when I got there, I was frozen. It wasn't him. It was a doll the same size as him. I couldn't believe it. I immediately ran away and tried to tell my parents what I had seen, but they didn't take me seriously. They thought it was something a child would do. Time passed, and one day while playing with my friends Angela and Chris, I kicked the ball so hard that it rolled a long way away, so Chris asked me to go and look for it. I walked after the ball, which seemed to be moving by itself, and in the end it stopped under a tree. But just as I tried to grab it, I heard a strange noise, a chilling sound coming from above the tree. But as I looked up, I was transfixed. There was a figure there, hanging. Its face was horrible, as if it had suffered a fire, with burnt skin and one eye hanging out of its socket. It was like the ghostly image of a child with long nails trying to touch me with its hand. I was so scared, and I screamed so loudly that I lost consciousness and fell to the ground, fainting. When I woke up, all I could hear was Angela's voice. She had taken me home, where I now had a terrible fever. 2 days passed and my fever was still there, getting worse and worse. On the third day, it was already night. I opened my eyes and realized that the house was empty. My mom was in the kitchen and my dad was in the bathroom. When I looked out of the window, I saw Mathieu's house, and there he was, standing by the window, moving his lips as if he was trying to say something to me, but I couldn't hear his voice. Everything went round again in my head because he was supposed to be on vacation with his parents for a month. So who was that boy looking at me from the window of Mathieu's house? I couldn't even process what I was seeing when a woman appeared out of nowhere and stabbed Mathieu with a knife. I was watching her do this over and over again, and I couldn't believe what was happening. Blood splattered on the curtains, and all I could think was, no, this can't be happening. But yes, I was watching it. It was happening before my eyes. At the time, I was only 14, and I didn't know how to react to what I was looking at. My eyes were so wide open I thought they were going to pop out of my head, along with my heart, which was making a hole in my chest from how hard it was beating. I ran out of my room as fast as I could and tried to explain to my parents that something horrible had happened at Matthew's house, but all I got was disbelief. Finally, they called the police, but as there was no more evidence than what I had seen while lying in bed with a fever, they couldn't do a proper investigation. So 15 days went by and nothing was heard from Matthew's family. It was as if they had vanished. As the days went by, I began to feel a kind of shadow around me. It was strange, as if someone was whispering in my ear, but I couldn't understand anything. One night, I had a chilling dream. In it, Mateo was calling me from a basement where there was a passageway leading to a hidden room. I woke up with a start, sweating and with my heart racing, but I was determined. I had to tell my mom everything, and I asked to go to Mateo's house the next day. When we arrived, we decided to break in because the police had told us that Mateo's parents had died in a car accident, but curiously, we didn't know anything about it. It was all very strange. While my parents searched the house, I ventured into that room I had dreamed of. I don't even know how I got there, only that I was trembling with fear. And as I approached the door, something came out from under the bed. It was a strange figure moving towards me. It was short, thin, with very long hair and red eyes that looked at me intensely. My God, it was as if it wanted to swallow my soul. Then I heard his voice whispering, saying that Matthew had been there, as if his spirit was trying to protect me. The figure kept coming, but then I heard Matthew inside my head. "Harry, you're the only one who can help me." In that moment, panicking, I ran to the basement, and luckily my parents followed me just in time. We went into the room, and to my surprise, there was Matthew's body. When the police searched the place, they realized that he was still alive, although he had been in a critical condition. They took him to the hospital immediately, and thank God, a few weeks later he came out of the coma he was in. When I had the opportunity to talk to him alone, I told him what had happened and how I managed to find out where he was. Then Matthew told me a story that still gives me the shivers. He told me that the figure he had seen in his room was a constant presence in their house. He told me that he saw it all the time, but that he had never said anything to it. It was like a presence that had been there since before they moved in. But not only that, he also told me a very sad story. He told me that his parents never loved him and that they had left him abandoned in the basement before leaving so that he would die there of hunger and thirst. But at that moment I remembered something, and a question popped into my head. If Matthew's mother didn't stab him, then who was that figure I saw through the window? I mentioned this to Matthew himself, but he had never seen such a vision. This only made me think that perhaps that figure was the same one I had seen in the room and also in the tree. However, I could never find out who or what this figure was, or if it was a child who had suffered a terrible fate in that house. It's just something that occurs to me, but maybe I'll never find out. Hello, my name is Marcus. I'm 37 years old, and some time ago I went through an experience that I still can't fully understand, and I'm writing this as a kind of therapy to convince myself that I'm not crazy. It all started with the death of my older brother, Daniel. He was a complicated guy, but we always had a good relationship. According to the reports, he died of a heart attack, but I always had this hunch that there was something else behind his death, as Daniel was very concerned about his health and there had never been any indication that anything could happen to his heart. So it seemed strange to me that a heart attack could take someone so young and in such good health. Maybe it was bad luck, but there was a feeling that wouldn't leave me alone. Daniel had always believed that the house we grew up in was haunted. After our mother died of what was said to be a stroke, Dad continued to live in that house, convinced that her death was due to another cause. I didn't care much. I had my own problems, but after Daniel's death, I began to think that maybe there was something else at stake. Shortly after Daniel's death, my dad asked me to go and check the house. He was very upset, and I understood that, and although I didn't feel like going back to a place that had been empty for years, I agreed to help him. So one day, I finally decided to go. At first, the sun helped calm my nerves, but from the moment I arrived, I felt a strange chill in the air, so I started opening windows and cleaning a little, finding old photos and cherished letters that we had forgotten about. After a couple of hours organizing the main room, I decided to take a break and explore the attic, which had always been a disconcerting place for me, and there I found a diary of Daniel's. When I opened it, I was hoping to simply find memories that would help me deal with his loss. But what I read was terrifying. Daniel had been documenting strange things that happened in the house, like noises at night, shadows moving, and that horrible feeling of being watched. My blood ran cold when I read about a tall man in a hat. At first, Daniel only saw him in his dreams, but then he said he started to see him even when he was awake in the house, staring at him. The last page of the diary was torn, which made me feel uneasy. Why didn't he ever tell me this, I thought? Did he not trust me? The last line specifically mentioned that this man was in the basement. I couldn't ignore that part, as it was precisely where my brother had died, so despite my growing anxiety, I went downstairs, trying to hold back the discomfort. The basement was dark and cold. The air was thick, as if something were keeping it down. Then I found a flashlight in a corner and decided to inspect more thoroughly. Everything seemed quite normal. Old boxes and furniture covered in cobwebs until I saw something in a corner. It was a small, crumpled piece of paper. At first, I thought it was just trash, but something told me it had to do with what I was looking for. But when I tried to shine the light on it, a wave of cold ran down my spine and the atmosphere became even more oppressive. The feeling was so overwhelming that I turned off the flashlight and stood there in silence, my nerves on edge. It was then that I started to hear footsteps, and my body tensed. At first they were soft, almost imperceptible footsteps, but little by little they drew nearer. My heart began to beat fast, but I couldn't see anything in the darkness. The feeling that I wasn't alone in this place intensified, especially as the cellar door had been closed when we entered, and clearly no one had come in from outside. That idea terrified me. My mind immediately went to Daniel's stories about the man in the hat, so without thinking twice, I turned on my heels and ran towards the stairs, going up two at a time, wishing to leave behind everything I had read and felt in that house and in the basement. But I knew this was just beginning. After I closed the cellar door behind me, my heart was racing, and that feeling of being watched came back even stronger. I knew I had to get out of the house as quickly as possible, but something stopped me. Suddenly, an overwhelming dizziness overcame me. It was as if the weight of the whole house had fallen on me. Then my eyes closed, and before I knew it, I fainted. When I woke up, I was lying on the living room floor. I wasn't sure how much time had passed, but it was already night, so at least 8 hours had elapsed. With a slight confusion, I got up and realized that I was still holding a small piece of paper in my hand. It was a piece that Daniel had torn out of his diary, and by blowing gently on it, I could read what he had written. "Dad, the man with the hat is real. We are sacrifices, so run. He lives in the dark and he has me trapped." I didn't fully understand what he meant, but I knew I had to trust him, so without thinking, I ran to the front door only to find it locked. I tried to open it, but something had locked it, and as I turned to look for another way, I saw something that made my blood run cold. From the darkness of the cellar, a head appeared, and there he was, the man with the hat, staring at me with a smile I wished I hadn't seen. Now I couldn't move. It was as if an invisible hand were strangling me. Then the man raised a hand, and the room was filled with an icy wind. The lights went out suddenly, and he began to move slowly towards me. In the darkness, I dragged my feet back, gathering all my strength to escape, and managed to stand up, feeling that every breath was a challenge. He approached slowly, enjoying my terror, toying with me before the capture. I managed to get up to the attic, thinking that there I might be out of his reach. And once I got inside, I tried to turn on the light, but it didn't work. Then, as if appearing out of nowhere, the man in the hat had materialized in front of me. He hadn't had to climb the stairs. He had simply emerged from the shadows and was now looking at me with that mocking smile, enjoying my struggle to escape. Next to me, Daniel's diary was still there, and when I looked at it again, a flash of understanding came over me. There was an image there that I hadn't seen before. The man in the hat, watching him and me when we were children. He had always been there. He was responsible for the death of my mother and my brother, and now he was determined to finish what he had started with me. In that moment of desperation, I decided that if I was going to die, I would do it on my own terms. So I let out a kind of war cry, knowing that this could be my end. I ran at full speed and threw myself out of the window, shattering the glass into 1,000 pieces. I fell to the ground, running into some of the shards of glass that were scattered around me, and I can honestly say that it was the most intense pain I have ever experienced. I had broken my leg and my arm, but at least I was alive. As I lay on the lawn, I looked up at the attic window once more, and there he was, the man with the hat still smiling, enjoying the scene. I was trying to process everything that had happened, and just at that moment I received a call. It was the police informing me that my father had died suddenly of a heart attack. At that moment, I remembered the words on the paper Daniel had left, and I began to understand the truth. My father must have made a pact with that man in the hat to extend his life at the cost of the lives of others, mine now. Of course, I had already lost my mother, and Daniel had been the first victim of this cruel game, and now it was my turn, but I managed to escape. Despite everything that had happened, my days went on, although I was very hurt. I tried to adapt and recover from my injuries, and eventually I succeeded. I made the firm decision never to return to that house, but there was one thing that wouldn't leave me alone. I knew that sooner or later someone else would occupy that place, and I felt deep sorrow for those people, because when they realized that the house already had an owner, it would be too late. It all started as an innocent sleepover with friends, with laughter, games, and jokes between friends, until suddenly everything changed, and a night that was supposed to be pure fun quickly turned into a real horror story, and all because of an innocent joke. I have always loved sleepovers. The thrill of spending the night away from home, sharing secrets and laughter with my closest friends is simply very rewarding. My name is Andrea, and I was 15 at the time. That night I met up with 5 friends, all of them schoolmates, at the house of one of them. We all arrived around 7 in the evening, carrying our rucksacks full of pajamas, sweets, and board games. My friend's house was huge, and her parents wouldn't be back until the next day, so everything was perfect. It would just be the 5 of us having a good time and enjoying ourselves all night long, with no parents to restrict us. I usually get on quite well with my schoolmates, but there was one in particular, Tanya, the hostess, who always made me feel uncomfortable. She had a bad habit of making unpleasant jokes about my appearance and saying things that made me feel bad or feel ridiculous in front of the others. Don't get me wrong, among friends we always tend to make jokes and laugh a little at each other. Something like a kind of healthy bullying, but in Tanya's case, things felt a little more intense. I felt that she somehow really wanted to upset me. I never knew how to react to her malicious comments, so I usually ended up laughing nervously and changing the subject very quickly so as not to make a bad scene. Once we all arrived, we started the night with the typical girls' sleepover activities. That is to say, we talked about the boys at school, we did our hair, we practiced the latest makeup trends, one of my favorite activities when I'm at girls' sleepovers, and we also bought a lot of junk food to watch a movie. But before that, someone suggested we play chase in the house. Something we all thought was a fantastic idea. I was completely unaware that this seemingly harmless suggestion would unleash one of the most terrifying nights of my life. One of those terrifying real horror stories that you never forget. For a long time, we ran around the house laughing and screaming, hiding behind furniture and in cupboards. It was too funny. At first, it was great fun. 6 girls running all over the house, chasing each other and laughing out loud. What could go wrong? However, little by little I realized that Tanya concentrated only on chasing me, and her advances became increasingly aggressive, until she reached a point where she caught up with me and threw me to the ground with too much force. It was unnecessary and excessive, and she hit me quite hard. I stood there breathless for a moment, feeling the weight of her body on top of mine. Then she whispered in my ear, something like, "That's what happens to you, fatso. You can't run fast." This made me feel uncomfortable, obviously, because although she said it in a mocking tone, almost as if it were a joke, you could feel the malice behind those words. This was something that my friends noticed, and they could feel the change in the atmosphere. The carefree laughter turned into tense silence. I tried to get up, but she kept me immobilized on the floor, so I said, "Enough is enough." Trying to keep my voice firm, despite my growing fear, it was then that the others decided to intervene and teach her a lesson. In a swift and coordinated action, we all managed to get her off me and immobilize her, although it was quite difficult, as she was very strong and fought frantically. We managed to tie a rope, or rather some improvised strings, around her hands and legs. It took us almost 20 minutes to restrain her, and by that time we were all almost out of breath. At that moment, we all backed away as we saw her tied hand and foot on the living room floor. The atmosphere was really weird because my friends were as angry as I was about her behavior towards me, but at the same time we knew that it had all gone too far. However, while she was screaming like crazy for us to untie her, one of my friends told her that she would stay like that for a long time because she was being aggressive and a bad friend. I didn't know if I totally agreed. I mean, at first it was kind of a joke, but it was a bit disturbing to see Tanya tied up there, although in the end the girls went along with it and agreed that it was a kind of punishment for her bad behavior towards me. After the incident, we turned on the television and started watching a reality show. At first, we were very attentive to what Tanya was doing, and we looked in her direction constantly, since after the girls made it clear to her that they wouldn't untie her until she recanted and apologized to me, she got angry and stopped talking to us. However, at a moment when we were completely distracted watching the television program, we heard Tanya's voice coming from the kitchen, and when we turned around, we realized that she was no longer where we had left her. She was now untied and standing in the kitchen doorway, with an almost diabolical expression of anger on her face and holding a huge knife in her right hand. At that moment, we all opened our eyes wide, and then we heard her say loudly, strongly, and with great fury, "Now you bitches are going to regret it," at the same time that she ran towards us with the knife raised high. Panic took hold of us instantly, and without thinking twice, we all ran in different directions. 3 of the girls managed to get into one of the rooms, locking the door behind them, while in my desperation, I ran to where I was in the bathroom upstairs. I had barely closed the door when I heard Tanya's heavy footsteps coming up the stairs, shouting at us to come out and try to tie her up again. My heart was beating so fast I was sure she could hear it. I locked the door and curled up against it. Then I heard Tanya pounding on the door of the room where my friends were locked up. She seemed to be kicking it and hitting it with the handle of the knife too, because you could hear the sound of metal against wood, while the girls were screaming on the other side, asking Tanya to stop, that she was behaving like a psychopath. But she didn't stop shouting at them, insulting them, repeating over and over again that she would kill them all, while she continued to bang on the door in a very terrifying way. Tanya started to shout my name and threaten me, but she did so while banging on the door of the room where my friends were, which made me think that she probably believed that I was there too. But it didn't take her long to realize that I wasn't in the room. Although I didn't hear the girls say anything to her, it is possible that by not hearing my voice she realized that I was not there. It was then that I began to hear her footsteps again in the hallway. She was calling me, telling me not to be a coward and to come out from where I was, while she seemed to be checking room by room. However, it didn't take her long to realize where I really was, so she approached the bathroom door where I was sitting on the floor in a complete state of panic. "Hey, Amy." Now her voice sounded deceptively sweet. "Why are you hiding? Let's play a little more." I didn't reply. Silent tears ran down my face as I prayed for this nightmare to end. At one point, I tried to make her see reason. I asked her to calm down, and I told her that she was acting like a madwoman, that she had exaggerated the situation too much. I also told her that if anyone got hurt, she would get into serious trouble, so she should put the knife back where it belonged and stop messing about. For a minute, I thought she would reflect on how exaggerated she was being and that her behavior was truly out of control. But instead, she started banging on the door again, this time with much more force and more anger. It's as if what I said had made her even more enraged, to the point of irrationality. Tanya was banging on the door so hard that I was sure that at some point she would manage to break it down, all the while insulting me and calling me all sorts of names, and also repeating that she would kill me. She was completely beside herself, and she started saying that she would stick the knife in me until it lost its edge, and that she wouldn't mind getting a life sentence as long as it got rid of me from this world. She also repeated over and over again the phrase, "I'll finish you off, you fat bitch." I must tell you that never in my life had I felt such panic. I was absolutely terrified, because judging by her behavior, it was clear that she was not right in the head. I was sure that Tanya suffered from some kind of mental illness that my friends and I were completely unaware of. I don't know how long I remained curled up, now against the wall, trembling with fear and listening to Tanya's threats. It was without doubt the most intense experience of terror I have ever had in my life. The hours dragged on while I remained inside that small bathroom. The sound of banging on the door alternated with periods of eerie silence, my mind racing, trying to understand how a simple sleepover had turned into one of those horror stories that we normally only hear about in the scary stories we tend to see on the internet. This was absolutely surreal. At one point, I must have fallen asleep, and when I woke up, I could see through the small bathroom window how the darkness of the night was slowly giving way to the light of dawn. Everything was silent at that moment, and for a moment I thought that everything that had happened that night had been a simple nightmare. And perhaps I would have believed it if I had found myself sleeping in my sleeping bag, or in bed curled up with one of my friends. But I was still in the bathroom, sitting on the floor with my back against the wall, which made it clear that it had all been real. At some point during the early hours of the morning, I heard muffled voices from below. It was the other girls whispering to each other, probably as scared as I was. I wanted to scream for help, but the fear of drawing attention kept me silent, exhausted, and terrified. Finally, I stayed there, and I must have been so exhausted that I fell asleep again, but this time my sleep was restless, and I had nightmares of Tanya bursting into the bathroom and stabbing me to death. I woke with a start and my heart racing, only to realize once again that I was still locked in, but safe. Finally, I heard the sound of cars pulling up and adult voices. At that moment, a wave of relief washed over me from head to toe. It was such a wonderful feeling I can't even describe it. My friend's parents had finally arrived to pick up their daughters, having no idea of the horror we had endured all night. And the worst thing was that at the time of the incident, our cell phones were lying in a drawer in the living room, as we had agreed to leave them turned off so that they would not interrupt us while we watched our favorite reality show, so we could not call them or ask for help in any way. Still scared and feeling my legs very numb, I opened the bathroom door and went downstairs, and there I found a totally surreal scene. There was Tanya, sitting quietly on the sofa, chatting with her mother as if nothing had happened. The other girls were pale and silent, exchanging nervous glances between them and with me. As absurd as it may seem, no one spoke of the incident in front of Tanya's parents. We just silently collected our things and left, each of us carrying the weight of that terrible night. A night when the sleepover had turned into a real horror story. Although this may seem very silly, the truth is that we never told our parents or anyone else what happened. We decided to keep it a secret because we thought that if we told our parents, they would never want to let us go to a sleepover again. And the truth is that this was something we loved doing, only we never did it with Tanya again. From that day on, we never spoke to her again, and she didn't want to talk to us either, so we just ignored each other when we met in class. But beyond the terrifying experience, I learned a great lesson that day. And that is that the people we think we know can turn out to be completely different from what we think. Since he was a child, my neighbor Stuart had always been a problem. I remember that the first time he had run-ins with the law was when he was 7 years old, when he stole a bag of sweets from the owner of the corner shop. For an adult, that might seem silly, but he was already showing signs that he was not on the right path. After that, things only got worse. Fights at school, arguments in the street, violent behavior at home, and some minor thefts that got him into more than one mess. His parents were at a loss. They didn't know why their son always chose the dark side, much less what to do to change him. His dad tried everything: severe punishments, therapy. He even took him to a summer camp to straighten him out, but nothing worked. Stuart just kept getting worse and felt increasingly drawn to the life of a bad boy, and it all came to a head when he started hanging out with a real gang. This surprised everyone, not because he had no history of rebelling, but because he came from a decent family in a quiet neighborhood with love and attention from his parents. He had everything that gang members don't usually have. When his parents found out that he had started talking about joining that gang, they decided to make one last move to try to get him back on track. They organized a kind of family meeting, where everyone, even the grandparents, got together to talk to him. One by one, they expressed how much they loved him and how much they wanted the best for his future. At one point, it looked like it was going to work. Stuart broke down, cried, and hugged everyone. It was an emotional moment just a few weeks before his birthday. For his 18th birthday, his family organized a big party, and they had a surprise gift that they were going to reveal in the middle of the celebration. The big day arrived, and the neighbor's house was full of people. They invited the whole family and the neighbors, including me. We weren't best friends, but after some differences, we had worked things out. The party started very early with a huge banquet and a strawberry and chocolate cake, which was Stuart's favorite, and when it was time to give him his surprise gift, the excitement was palpable. Everyone was eager to see his reaction. His mom covered his eyes with her hands while his dad guided him towards a huge box wrapped in shiny paper, and when they finally uncovered his eyes, he almost fell over in shock at what was in front of him. His dream car, a brand new Ford F-150 with a bright red bow on the hood, all for him. Stuart couldn't believe his eyes. His dad put the keys in his hand and he slowly walked towards the tiled path that led to the street where the truck was parked. At that moment, his younger sister Stephanie ran after him, eager to get in first, seeming even more excited about the gift than her brother. The atmosphere was one of pure joy, but underneath, there was an air of tension. Everyone knew that Stuart had been on the edge of an abyss, and although that night it seemed that everything was going to change for him, there was a small group who wondered if he could really leave his life of problems behind. When Stuart finally got into his new truck, he sank into those deliciously comfortable leather seats and caressed the interior as if he couldn't believe it was finally his. His sister Stephanie jumped into the back, bouncing around as if it were a trampoline. The party was at its peak. Everyone was celebrating Stuart's birthday in style, and in the midst of all that joy, no one noticed the black car slowing down in the street. Suddenly, the air was filled with a deafening noise. Bursts of gunfire shattered the atmosphere of happiness. We all threw ourselves to the ground, covering our ears as the sound reverberated around us and glass flew through the air like confetti. When the noise finally stopped, we heard the screech of tires as the car took off at full speed. We looked out onto the street and reality hit us like a kick in the stomach. Stuart was lying on the pavement, his lifeless body slumped in a pool of blood welcoming us to the sidewalk. The van, which had been a symbol of joy, was now riddled with bullet holes and surrounded by shards of glass. Stuart's mother's heart-rending screams rang out, and the scene was so horrific it seemed like something out of a horror movie. His parents rushed towards him, trying to do something, and luckily Stuart was still conscious, although seriously injured. His life was slipping through his fingers. We all took out our phones to call 911, hoping that the ambulance would arrive quickly. Finally, we heard the sirens, but while his parents were struggling to keep their son alive, the rest of us could only watch, shocked and helpless. But that wasn't the only bad news waiting for us, because we suddenly realized that someone wasn't there. Stephanie. As we watched the ambulance take Stuart away, his grandmother came out of the house shouting Stephanie's name, and that's when we remembered that she wasn't alone in the van. Panic broke out in our hearts, and we all ran back to the vehicle. Then a heart-rending scream broke the air, and I saw something that I will never be able to erase from my memory. In the back of the van, Stuart's father was holding Stephanie's little bloodied body. She was only 9 years old. Her skin was pale and she was not moving. In that instant, we understood the tragedy we were facing. But every parent struggles with accepting what they see. Her dad tried to resuscitate her, alternating between compressions and breathing, but that only made the situation worse. Soon he was soaked in the blood of his 2 children, screaming in silence. The paramedics did everything they could to save her on the way to the hospital, but as soon as they arrived at the emergency room, the doctors confirmed what we all feared. Stephanie had died. The reaction of her parents was heartbreaking. Her mother knelt down and cried out her daughter's name, while her father hugged her, crying inconsolably. It was a heartbreaking image that remained engraved on the mind, making you question everything you believed about life and the existence of God. As the pain invaded the family, the police began to ask questions to those of us who were there, but none of us had any idea who had carried out the attack or why. The following days seemed to last forever. The family took turns keeping vigil, waiting and praying. The doctors were unable to give a clear prognosis. Stuart underwent 3 surgeries in the space of 2 days. Finally, on the morning of the 3rd day, the doctors gave his parents some encouragement. He was going to survive, but the road ahead would be long and complicated. When Stuart woke up, they told him about his sister. I wasn't there when they gave him the news, but I don't want to imagine how devastating it must have been. If there was anyone he really loved, it was Stephanie. The love between them was pure and strong, and that loss would mark him forever. After everything that had happened, Stuart became a real enigma. The police were the only ones who managed to get any information out of him about what had happened. He did what he could to help, although he didn't recognize the guys who shot him. However, he had certain suspicions about who they were, and he gave the authorities all the details he had. The days after the shooting were chaotic. News of Stephanie's death appeared in every newspaper in the country. The authorities felt pressured to catch those responsible for this horrible tragedy. The investigation took up a lot of time and resources, but they finally managed to catch the driver of the car, and a couple of days later, he turned in his accomplices. Almost a year later, the trial came. Stuart testified still using a cane, a constant reminder of everything that had happened. The 2 shooters were already on death row, awaiting their fate. For everyone, that was a relief. At least we knew they were off the streets once and for all. Stuart, for his part, managed to heal most of his injuries, although he would always walk with a slight limp. Even so, there was something that would never go away: the guilt he carried for the death of his sister. He was honest with his parents about his connection to the gang, revealing that he had actually been a member for a while, but that he decided to leave just before the shooting. This was the punishment for leaving the group. After that horrible incident, we started to get closer. At first, I just wanted to show him support, but over time we became good friends, and now we talk from time to time. One of the things that Stuart told me I will always remember. He recounted an episode with his dad that marked his life. When he was about 15 and still caught up in his problems, his old man sat him down in the living room and gave him a talking to. While he was scolding him, he said something that haunts him to this day. "You think you've got everything under control, but what you've experienced so far are just little warnings. It won't always be like this. One day the chickens will return to their coop and give you what you really deserve. If you continue with this life, you could end up in jail or, God forbid, dead. And the ones who will truly suffer will be us, your loved ones." That time I saw in his eyes that those words torment him, and that kind of burden must be heavier than death itself.